Welcome to the Quiet Warrior Show, where we help top leaders find their pathway to incredible success and a lifetime of happiness. Here is your host, Tom Dutta, the Quiet Warrior.
My name is Tom Dutta. I am the host of the Quiet Warrior Show, and I'm excited to have on the show to do a very special guest, LAILA TARRAF. Now, before we let her come on and start telling us about her life story, I wanted to tell you about how I met LAILA. It was through a connection that somebody said you might want to take a look at LAILA's story. And everybody, if you know the narrative of the show, we're the hero's journey. That's where people who have done incredible things in their life will come on and tell their story, but the full story, the backstory, where we have many learnings. And I found a book that LAILA read, and I was just telling her this morning, I put it down and I literally just finished it. We're going to talk about that. If you don't know about live streaming, we're popping up on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. I'd like to ask everybody to find the Tom Dutta YouTube channel and subscribe to it, hit the authorizations button. The reason we want to do that is because we're going to produce this epic interview as a YouTube premiere in the future to honor LAILA's story. You also can find the Quiet Warrior Show on any of your favorite podcast channels. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to the Quiet Warrior Show LAILA TARRAF. LAILA, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. I'm really happy to be here.
I'm excited. You're coming to us from Boston. There's something going on there. Do you want to tell us what that is?
Well, I live in the Bay Area, but we're here this week because I have a high school junior, and so we're touring schools here in New England. Big.
That's amazing. And so who out there just connected to that part of the story, everybody here, you know, do you have a son or daughter? Are they at that stage of entering college or university? You know, LAILA, I told you that my daughter's back on the other side of the country and I haven't seen her for 2 years. So this brings in that whole other dimension, and I'll timestamp this show that we're in the middle of a pandemic. So everything has changed.
Yes.
So LAILA, let's get into with a fun question of you. Tell us something about yourself that you think, you know, most people don't know about you. Just one little thing.
Ooh, start with a big one. I think if you meet me through my work, I can be, I have a lot of conviction. I can be really, really direct. And what you may not know about me is I'm actually pretty lighthearted and I like to kid around and I'm very playful. But if you only know me in business, you might think that I'm more serious than I really am.
All right. I love it. And I wrote down here somewhere when I was doing my show notes, the velvet hammer. So of course that everybody will know what that means in a moment. Well, I'm going to tell the audience about you. I want them to know the depth behind you before we get into the story. Everyone, LAILA is a senior human resource executive with over 25 years of professional experience. And she has an MBA from Haas School of Business at the University of California at Berkeley. And she became one of the founding team members of Walmart. And we could do a whole story, I'm sure, on that journey. Today, she's the chief. Walmart.com. There we go. And the chief people officer at Allbirds, which I thought was an interesting brand. It's a sustainable footwear and apparel brand. You're also an advisor to entrepreneurs and investors and a regular lecturer at Berkeley Law School. So when we have on the show people with that kind of background, such as yourself, sometimes the audience who are diverse, we have an international audience, they say, wow, this woman has done everything, you know, and they want to know the story. I'd like to take a different approach and go back to the beginning. You know, you were born, and where did it start that you had an interest in getting into business? And then take us up to the point of when you got married.
Sure. So my parents are both Lebanese. We lived in Beirut until I was 7. My father was in the casino business, so we moved to Las Vegas in the early 70s when I was just a child. And, you know, neither one of my parents went to university. And we were first generation immigrants, and I was a pretty good student, and I really thought I wanted to be a pediatrician. I really loved helping people. And I remember somebody said when I was 17, oh, you want to be a doctor? That's like 10 years. And, to a 17-year-old, that's more than half your life. So I scrapped that idea, and there was nobody around to tell me, no, actually, it gets broken up. And so I went to university, and I ended up majoring in a major called computer information systems. And this is just when computers were taking off. And when I graduated, then I went back to business school. I kind of fell into recruiting. And because of my undergrad in computer information systems, I recruited a lot of engineers because I could speak their language. And that eventually landed me at Walmart.com after business school. And after the first year of taking the company from 7 employees to 250, my CEO at the time, her name was Jean Jackson, she said, look, why don't you just take the HR job? You're doing it anyway. And to be honest, my first thought was, no, thank you. I really didn't see myself as an HR person. I didn't, at the time, this was 1999, 2000. I didn't think that HR was sort of the core of the business. And thank goodness I did it, because it has ended up being a very good career for me. I got married right after I left, right when I was at Walmart, and as I was going to Pete's, and was starting my career as an HR executive right in the early 2000s.
Well, thank you. I mean, I made a note here. So for everybody who's listening to the podcast in the future, you won't see me madly making notes. I'm looking down. I'm not ignoring you, LAILA.
Oh, it's okay.
Going back to the story that you were telling us, you said you're from Lebanon. I know we could have had a lot of other discussions about your parents and the history growing up, but I want to leave that because a lot of that comes out in the book. As I said, everybody, the book is called why don't you tell us the title of the book, because I'm just finding it.
The title of the book is Strong Like Water: How I Found the Courage to Lead with Love in Business and in Life.
Fantastic. Strong like water. And I was looking at another note I wrote when you were talking offline with me about be like water, which is the hidden meaning behind that, which we'll get into. But I found it really interesting what you said about not a people person or HR person. And then everybody, you got to get this book and read it from cover to cover, give it a high rating, because there is an incredible story about resilience and what I call transformational leadership that comes out of it. So there you are, and you're married, and I think the gentleman's named Daniel, and something incredible happens December 4th, 2007. Take us into that story.
So I was just completing my first year as the Chief People Officer at Pete's Coffee. It was my first real executive role. I had a 3-year-old daughter, and my husband Daniel, at the time we had been married almost 7 years, died of an accidental overdose. It happened very, very fast. Obviously, it was very tragic. In October of that year, he said, "Gosh, I don't think this is working for me," out of the blue, and less than 2 months later, he was gone. So that was really the first big loss, big tragedy I had in my career, in my life. And it stopped me in my tracks. Up until that point, nothing had taken me off my singular focus. And that was one it just took me to my knees.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to let you catch your breath there, LAILA. It's an emotional story to tell, and I want to honor you for doing that. Here we are live streaming, and you've written this in your book, and I don't know how many people would have the courage to do that. So I want to honor you and just get into this, because I went on a journey in my head about that I read in the book your beautiful daughter, who now apparently is looking for a place to go to college, Nadia, and thinking of a child, what was she, a couple months old when Daniel passed, or how old
she was? 3 years old.
She was, yeah. I mean, I can't even remember back the age of 3, but they say back at the age of up till 7 or 10, we really don't have the use of our rational brain. So this happened. Tell us about that moment. I mean, you went through this. I read the book, and I'm not going to steal all this thunder of it, but you didn't know the reason for Daniel's death. Just take us into a little bit of that
Yeah.
story and what happened with your daughter Nadia. How did you handle that?
Well, I didn't say anything the first couple days. I still was in shock myself because it happened so suddenly, and I didn't say anything. And then there was one day where she was chatting, and I was feeling so guilty. I felt like I was harboring this secret, and I couldn't hold it back anymore. And so we were, I was feeding her dinner, and I told her I had already reached out to a therapist I'd worked with in the past, and he said, keep it very concrete. 3-year-olds don't understand sort of abstract notions of death. And I just told her that her daddy fell, and he hurt himself, and when your body stops working, that's what's called dead. And she got it right away. She kept on repeating it over and over, as you know, in the book I write that. I would say if I didn't have my daughter, I may not have dealt as openly with this loss as I did, because it was very clear to me that for her to process the loss and work through the grief of losing her father, I would have to be right there with her and grieve and allow myself to feel, which was not in my playbook up until that moment. I had reframed everything to the positive. It was fine. It was fine. You're just not looking at it the right way. And this just was not something I could intellectualize or hide from, even if I wanted to, because I had to show up for her every day. And that really is what put me on the path for the hero's journey, right? There was no way around the feeling and around going into the abyss.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the hero's journey, which is the narrative behind today's show. And she's a very special girl. I mean, reading the book and just learning about Natty and how she processed this right up until the very end. And I'll leave that till later in the story about something magical that happened that LAILA actually relived a part of my life through that. But this whole thing about, the death of your husband, and I'm so sorry for that loss. We can't even imagine the pain that you still endure as you navigate life. You didn't know about the accidental overdose till later. How much later was that?
Later. I'd
months
say 4
later.
months later. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did that feel, not knowing about the true cause of his death? What emotions did you go through?
I think so. A year into our marriage, Daniel had a terrible bicycle accident where he broke his back. And at the time, he was put on really, really strong pain meds. And this was in 2002. So pretty early, we didn't really know how powerful those drugs were and how addictive they could be. And I think in the back of my head, I suspected, but I never really allowed myself to go there. Again, I wasn't going to go there. My coping mechanism was distraction, keep moving, keep moving. And it really wasn't until I saw just in black and white ink right in front of me that was the cause, that I really allowed myself to go back and just connect the dots along the way of what had happened. And I think I realized that ever since that bicycle accident, he probably really never did stop doing something, and which is why it happened so quickly in the end. It really wasn't that quickly. I just saw it as very quickly because I didn't really know all along the way.
Yeah. Well, thank you, LAILA. And again, what an incredible part of the story to share with us. Everybody, I think I want to get into a little bit of where my head's going. It goes on a journey, Nadia, each time you say something. And I have read the book, so I know a lot more about the story. So if you'll just allow me to jump all over, there is a thread here that is so powerful in the book, and it's about the impact that our earlier life as children have, particularly in how we're raised or our belief systems of our parents, how that transforms, or should I say shows up in our business career, I do coaching, and I'm an executive. And it took me a long time in my life to realize that business, family, and my personal self are all connected. And if you don't have them all aligned, things don't work. About your vulnerability, a tough kind of hammer. And through the tragedy, the first loss in your life, you started discovering some things about yourself. And I know you made some connection to your daughter even being a mentor to you. But take us into that part of the story, how you were seen at work, which I'm going to use the word incongruent to who you discovered you really were later in your life.
Well, I didn't really realize at first that I was so ill-equipped to feel anything outside of sort of positive emotions. I'd sort of spent my life really staying above messy feelings as a coping mechanism to deal with life. And of course, it's based on my early childhood. And when I saw my daughter really calling out for her father and needing to be comforted, I noticed that I was crawling in my skin because I didn't know how to do it. And in some way, I couldn't wait to get back to work so I could just kind of turn off that part of myself, turn off my heart, and just be at work and because I knew how to do that. And so the wall between my sort of intellectual, cerebral self and my heart started to come down. And that was what really started to have me self-reflect and recognize that I was as disintegrated and incongruent as you were saying, and that I'm really just one person, and I needed to bring those things together. And in a way, I really marveled at Nadia because she was sad. If she was having a bad day, if she was having a moment, it would just come all out and then it'd be gone. She processed it and it was gone. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute here. Because I was so afraid. I was so terrified of allowing myself to feel anything, any sort of pain at all. I would contort myself into a pretzel so that I wouldn't have to feel it. And of course, and so many spiritual people say this, but it is the resistance to the thing that causes the suffering, then the thing we are resisting itself. But I didn't know that. I didn't know that for like 40 years. And slowly I began to lean into the resistance, to stay with the discomfort. It was like a hand on a flame. Whoop, gone. I mean, before I even knew that I was having an emotion, I was gone. And so slowly, it took years for me to, and I remember once I was talking to my therapist and he was trying to make me sad. And the more sad he would try to make me, the more angry I became. And then finally I said, why are you trying to make me sad? He said, is that bad? And I looked at him and I said, what? He said, why are you resisting being sad? And it was the first time why am I resisting being? Why is it so hard? Why is it so unacceptable for me to just be sad? I say that today, and I'm like, I mean, for 40 years, I wouldn't allow it. It was not. Did you see that movie Inside Out with all the characters were the different emotions of the child? Did you ever see that
Yes.
Pixar movie?
Yeah, I did.
Where joy says to sadness, she goes, okay, sadness, this is the circle of sadness. Your job is to make sure that all the sadness stays inside the circle. That was me. My inner joy had become a drill sergeant. And so it really was allowing my sadness to come out. She had a lot to say.
Yeah, I just jump in here. One of the things that sent me on a journey is you said 40 years to figure out. Now, everybody, just listen to this. As you get deeper into the story, and I do encourage again to read the book Strong Like Water. We'll talk about that at the end, how you can get it. This is somebody on the outside, LAILA, who we see as at that time, the chief people officer with a company called Pete's Coffee, if I got that right. Now, we see business leaders, and this is one of my passions, LAILA, is to really look at what makes them successful. But for a long time, I didn't know that being vulnerable, showing, being able to handle and show uncomfortableness or other people's pain, I didn't know that either. And yet it was something in my personality that was innate. I was born with that as a gift. But here's the magic of your book. It reminded me that, my father was a military commanding officer, and he was a very much a personality like yours, very much get things done, be tough. And in an early age, uh, many children don't realize that our thoughts and emotions are wired into our neural nets, and that is what goes on unconsciously below the surface. I know I see you're nodding there. I just want to go on and read a couple things I wrote from the book here. I love this on page 137. Uh, Somebody was talking to you about, developing the body of a coach, and I wrote the notes: develop compassion. The ability to be with someone else's suffering is called compassion.
Hmm.
The other person's ability to open up to you and experience their pain in your presence is tied directly to whether or not they can feel your compassion. That
That's
is
right.
such a teaching moment, everybody, for the show. Now, I want to dive in here and take a risk. Take a risk. I'm married to my amazing wife, Anna, 25 years. I swear to you in reading your book that your personality is much similar to hers. She went into business, she climbed the ladder, became a manager, but she was tough and she didn't show emotion. Everything was perfect. Her family was always great. And yet I was the one who came from a, traumatic childhood and had all these problems. And in our marriage, which today we're very deeply married, but I went through this. I could have been in the story Daniel in some way that her and I would have, where she would say, well, you're just messed, to deflect her book from a therapist. And this one jumped out at me as another part of my story of my own life. It says, where is it here? Something about making the same mistake twice, so that you could use, another man's problems to not deal with your own shit. Something like that I read in the book. I know you'll correct me if I misstated that, but it really hit home because I went, that's exactly the story, part of the story of my life. In that we find that it's easier to look at somebody else's faults, and it reminded me that rather than looking at somebody else's faults, sometimes I need to do the work for myself, look at myself, my own strengths. And I started that journey in my life a long time ago, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, when I couldn't understand why relationships were tough, why at work I was hard driving and getting things done, but getting people to feel me and me to feel their emotion, it wasn't happening. And yet
Hmm.
I was born with that gift, as I mentioned. So I want to say thanks for writing that in your book, because it is a huge. It's somebody like you comes out of the shadows who has to experience loss in their life of the most incredible kind, to be able to go on a self development and figure that out and put it in a book so people like me and others can now learn from it. Because I believe, Lael, and I'll give it back to you on this, I believe that there will be people who will go to their grave unhappy,
Yeah.
struggling at work, being able to relate to people, not understanding why they can't show emotion, and then they'll never take the time to sort that out, because unfortunately God hasn't put in their path something such as the death of your dear Daniel, to have you stop and say, I'm tired of this pain, I want to go figure it out. Tell us a bit more.
Yeah, that was a quote by my coaching instructor. I went back and got my coaching certification. His name is James Flaherty. He's an amazing man. And yes, he used to say that if you immediately go to problem solving when you are in the presence of someone, they can feel it, right? You go to your head and you make no space for any of the emotion or the feelings to come out, and you're in essence invalidating how they feel because you're so focused on the problem to solve and you're not making space. for the other things that are unsaid. And when he first said that, to develop the body of a coach, I'm like, what does that mean? Because, we all have emotional resonance. We're feeling beings. We have mirror neurons. If someone walks into a room, you can tell if that person is happy or upset or sad, right? You can feel it. And so I remember actually very recently, I said to a friend who's worked with me at two prior companies, Walmart and Pete's, and I said, hey, did I used to be the B word, right? I mean, I was direct. She goes, no, I would not say that. She said, I never thought that I could have a tough conversation with you in those early days and have it turn out the way that I played it through in my head, because you were just, I was so direct, like, oh, well, here's the problem. Here we go. Let me fix it. And I realized that she was talking about the fact that I didn't make space. I wasn't showing compassion. I was going right into my head. And the irony here, Tom, is that had I not been through my journey and where I am, and it's not like I'm compassionate 24/7, right? It's a moment by moment thing. There is no way that I could have led through this past year, through a global pandemic, the social unrest that we have had and are having, a politically divisive year. Leading right now in 2020, 2021 is all about integrated, connected, compassionate leadership. There's no other way you can do it. When I think about 2010 or 2000, it just feels like it was 1950s Pleasantville. I mean, those days are gone. I was listening to a CEO talk the other day, and he said, leadership now is in Technicolor. It's like 3D chess. And it is. And you can't do that unless you bring your whole self and all your senses, your head, your heart, your body, everything.
I think that's such a teaching moment, everybody. I'm going to read something else that I wrote down from your book, page 97. What you wrote was, my ability to rise above my inner voice, my gift or my curse. Yeah. And this is a question I'd like to leave out there as your legacy for anybody listening to the show, that as a leader, is that a gift or a curse? And I want everybody to understand here, as we do this story, as it unfolds, that there's two tracks here. LAILA, the chief people officer of a company, and LAILA, the mom, and the lady who's gone through a tragic loss. Many of us show up at work and we're navigating these things, right, LAILA? I remember it's no comparison, but I had a miniature Shih Tzu, a little dog, for 16 years, and she passed away last November. I never thought I was connected to that dog. We actually got her when my daughter was 1 year old, but she would wait for me every time I came home from work and would be at the door, and she would sit beside me when I taped my shows, and she's not there. And some of these losses that we experience, they make us reflect. So I would show up at work the next day and my dog died, and having all this emotion, but I have to be tough and strong leading the company. And yet I kind of wish somebody would ask me, how did it go with the loss of your dog? And I could show that vulnerability or that emotion for a minute. I want to say one more thing here about something brilliant you said about leadership, that through my own mistakes, I learned the same thing. I learned something about, and I say this boldly, and sometimes men look at me funny, but I believe women are stronger leaders for a reason, that the old transactional leadership style, which is, LAILA, do this and you'll get your bonus, versus having to connect to your heart and help you see something beyond the work. That's really transformational. And I think the world's shifting now. They have a lot more work to do, but you're an example of what great looks like in this area, that if you can finally realize that leading with that vulnerable emotional energy, which women are very good at innately, they're the nurturers, the child bearers, but it's covered up because of these things that are put in us that, quite frankly, aren't true, and they were put in us by somebody else. And I'm going to let you hook here in the story, because I was tough on you a few minutes ago about being tough and dealing with your shit. And by the way, everybody, that was in the book, so I paraphrased a couple of those words with no disrespect. But it took me a long time to realize, LAILA, that part of my style of relationships and my challenges came from codependent, narcissistic was away a few years ago moment. And I want to get into that for a moment as much as you want to. But there's a real important message here. Your parents, you can tell us about your parents. And there was this relationship they had, and that's what wired your brain, your unconscious brain, to show up the way you did. It wasn't anything you were born with. It actually was put in you, and you had to discover it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so my mom and dad had a very traditional marriage. My dad was the breadwinner, and my mom took care of the house and the kids. And it was, my father was the boss of the house, the way that I saw it, right? He would make demands, and my mother would acquiesce. And he would yell, and sometimes he would hit. And so and I was the eldest of three. And so very quickly, I took on the role as the mediator. And so this is the sort of thing you're like, was that nature, nurture, birth order? I don't know. But I figured out pretty quickly who I had to be to get both of their attention, which was different because they were, when your mom and dad are warring and they're not on the same page, I had to figure out how to ingratiate myself to both sides and show up slightly differently to both. And so to be close to my father, I felt I needed to act like him and be strong and powerful and capable and not show any weakness. And I would try to nurture my mom and be supportive of her. But in the early days, I saw two people, and given those choices of what I saw, like who did I want to be more like, I wanted to be powerful. Of course, now I know that that's really not true power, that what my father was showing, but I didn't know that, right? And so I decided pretty quickly I was going to adopt the version of power that I saw in my father. And it served me well moving into the business world, right? Because business has been, it's a patriarchal structure, which is why I think that many women are more direct and tough at work, but that is changing. And I really think that for Gen X, and I'm sort of an old Gen X, the Gen X generation, I think, is really our opportunities to bridge the baby boomers with the millennials. The millennials are, they're beautiful. You cannot manage them that way. They're idealistic and they talk openly about how they feel and if they're anxious. And that old school sort of command and control leadership just does not work anymore. And so I feel grateful to be leading at this moment in time and to have learned the lesson that you can be direct and capable, and that's great, but you also need to bring your heart, because it's all about winning hearts and minds.
You said something about men and the old command and control, and I'm going to go right there because I'm a guy who was raised by a father, obviously, but a military commanding officer, command and control style. And I'm going to say that men for too long have got it easy. They haven't been let off the hook for that style. And as you said, the millennials, the next generations, even my people like my daughter, they want mentors and coaches. And everybody, here we are with LAILA, the chief people officer of a large company, telling us that is the way to the future of leadership. And she's absolutely right. And I'm going to confirm that as a man, that the command and control style of leadership does not work. And I know this because in my story, in my early years, became a CEO at the age of 31. I failed in developing relationships with people, and I had to have a coach break my habits, which led back to some wiring that was in me from my childhood. Now, lately, we mentioned about narcissistic codependent. There's something in that. We don't have a lot of time to get into all the complexities of it, but emulating part of the relationship of your parents. From what I read in your book, you discovered something incredible, that it actually gave you a path to choose your next partner in life. And so you were acting out this role again in your life that you saw between your parents. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so my parents had a codependent relationship, and as you know, if you repeat the cycle that you know. And even though I had gone to therapy, I had tried to figure out my stuff, it didn't prevent me from falling into a similar relationship, right? So I think subconsciously I chose Daniel because I could tell that I would be able to help him, fix him, rescue him, right? Because that's the role that I saw my mother play in my relationship with my mom and dad. And so there was something inside of me, completely subconscious, that recognized that, I think, when I met Daniel, and picked him so that I could stay emotionally safely hidden. Because again, at the time, I hadn't figured out yet to really allow myself to feel, um, and choosing a partner where I would have to be the person to help them and rescue them was a very valid and great reason to keep myself hidden. And and that's what happened, right? I chose him, and then I resented the fact that I was in that relationship, even though I had chosen it myself. And that's how we get stuck.
Yeah.
And that's what I had to work out of.
Yeah. Listen, thank you. And tragically, it worked itself out, and maybe not the way we would
Yeah.
always want. Uh, but another teaching moment here, and then I want to move on to the last chapter of the story.
Okay.
I'm so honored and so proud of you and your story. I mean, I love you for what you're saying here, that you're teaching us, and this is hard for people to talk about themselves, but we love our parents, and I always say you love your mom and dad. I say about my own dad that the demons of my dad were the gifts that I used. They were like superpowers. And when I finally discovered them, I want to read something here from the book. I kind of smiled. It's one of the treasures you gave me. So my mom, by the way, when she met my dad in the Fiji Islands, my parents are Fijian. My mom used to refer to my dad, because he was a choir boy, didn't drink, didn't smoke. He was a Mormon, as her little Elvis. And I have pictures of my dad, and he looks like that. And in your book, I read about your father, and your mom used to kind of, somehow it was referred to you. It took me on a journey. I just wanted to put that out there, and thank you.
Wow, that's so
Uh,
funny.
Sadly, yeah, I mean, it's one of those other list of 8 things in your book that I said, that's my story. The Sadly, your father became ill, and eventually he passed away. I want you to just take us to the moment of the funeral. You talk about this in the book, and there was a discovery you had about your past memories of your father. I think you wrote about it, about how you saw him, but somebody named Bobby Stamper, who used to work with your dad at the
Yeah.
Sands, said
Yeah.
something to you, which you went, huh? Tell us about that.
Yeah. So, about 15 months after my husband passed, my dad had a stroke and died. And so here was again another loss in a very short period of time. Again, I think the universe gives you opportunities to heal and to grow, and here was one. So I had, organized and my father's service, and I was sitting at the back of the church, and my father was, when he passed, he was a pit boss at the MGM. But in the early days, when we first moved to Vegas, he was a croupier, a craps dealer at the Sands Hotel. And at his funeral, these men were standing out there. It looked like a scene out of like Goodfellas or Casino or something. Really good-looking older men, double-breasted jackets. And one of them came and started speaking to me, and he was telling me all these stories about my father. I'm like, who is he talking about? We knew our dad as someone who was really strict and angry, and you just kind of went to your room because you didn't want to deal with that. And he was sharing with me memories of my father as a person. And then he just said how proud he was. He goes, "You must be LAILA. You live in San Francisco. Your dad never stopped talking about you. He was so proud of you." I was like, what? My father never said anything to me ever about any accomplishments. Um, and I just think he was old school, right? And here he was, boasting about me and telling his friends how proud he was of me. And it was just so sad in that moment to think that I didn't even know that until after he was gone. And it also made me realize that I needed to, I was insistent to see things the way I wanted to see them. And I probably could have softened and seen that he really did love me and was proud of me. He just couldn't show it. He just couldn't show it in the way that, verbally, that I wanted to see it. It was nice to hear it.
I asked you what the name of your father was.
George. George
What
TARRAF.
was your
Yeah.
George? Okay. Well, we're gonna honor George. Uh, and my dad's name was Ashok, Ashok, which is a Indian
Yeah.
name. My parents were from Fiji, grandparents from India. But I want to tell you, I wrote this down here, page 108 in the book. Core memories of your dad, was big fights, one after another,
Mm.
and that's all you really remembered of your parents having arguments and fights. And then this whole other story came out. I want to just tell you that it got my heart because when my dad passed away, my two brothers chickened out, didn't want to do the eulogy, and I had to do the eulogy. I was estranged from my dad for some 10 years. I took
Mm.
the brunt of his abuse and physically, mentally in the family. And 3 months before he passed, I had coffee with him, finally reconnected. And I felt somewhat shameful because I kept my daughter's relationship away from him for 10 years, which is another thread going to your sister, part of your story. Dad, I asked him about his, he was raised in a way that uh, put him in a situation where he couldn't show emotion. So I grew
Right.
up, my brain believed that my dad didn't love me. He didn't care about what I did. And to be like him, I had to be tough and strong. And that is exactly
Mhm.
the story you told in your book. And I want to say this to honor you, Layla, that there's millions of people out there who will read your book, and it changes one life at a time. This is a home run story you've written and put it out there. The last thing I want to say about that is after the eulogy, we were in this lineup, my brothers and I. And remember, my mom was, or you didn't know this, my mother wasn't at the funeral. She was very ill. My parents were divorced when I was 12 or 13. So my dad's gone, and there's three boys who we never had a relationship because of what happened in our family. We just distant. And people started coming up to us, a lineup of 100 people saying, and they looked at me and they would say, "Your father talked about you all the time. He was proud of you." And I couldn't believe it. And I was uncomfortable. There's my brothers and they're ignoring him. Well, what about them? I'm going. And it exactly when you said that in the book about your story, my
Yeah.
brain had tricked me all my life thinking my dad didn't love me. And that brought itself into my work and my relationships. And I went on my
Yeah.
own personal journey years ago before I read your book where I unraveled all that. I want to get to the last part of the story, which is to honor your mother. Your mom, sadly, through the journey of life, old age, passed away. And there was that moment in your book, page 169. I think the chapter was Falling into Forgiveness. Your mom's health was failing. Uh, you had to get to her. There was some barriers from the past. And then you had a sister and brother. Tell us a little bit about that, how that played out.
Well, I obviously I wasn't there when Daniel passed, and when my father passed, we got a call from the hospital. He was in Las Vegas. It was on my daughter's 5th birthday, and I thought, okay, I'll leave first thing in the morning. And he died a few hours before I got there. And I really understand why closure is so important. And then when my mother's health was failing, my daughter and I were in this remote area camping, and every day I would ride a bicycle up the hill to the hotel that had a phone so I could call her caregiver to see how she was doing. And I was terrified I would miss it. And I was finally in a position where I had built enough capacity to be with someone dying. I couldn't have done it a few years earlier. And finally, I just said, okay, I need to go. This is happening. I just know. And I was able to be with her at her deathbed. And my sister, who was estranged from the family, I don't think she'd seen my mom in maybe 8, 10 years. I had to work very, very hard to get her to come see my mother. She had so much anger and so much resentment, which I understood. I really did. But in that moment, I kept on saying, she is going to be gone. I didn't say you will regret this. I didn't want to shame her, but I finally said, I will be there with you, realizing she held a lot of the wounds that I had and maybe just wasn't where I was. And that's what finally flipped her. She said, okay, I'll come. And the same thing with my brother. And so it is the thing sounds silly, but so proud of, to be able to have the emotional uh, wherewithal to get there myself and to bring my brother and my sister to be with her. And in some way, it just felt so poetic to usher the woman out of this life that brought me into this lifetime. So that to me was kind of the perfect ending, and feel so blessed. And forgiveness is the hardest quality, right? It is the hardest thing to do, and that was the moment that I just let it all go.
Oh, thank you. I wrote this down here. When your mom passed away, it's page 178. There was a quote: thank you, God, for getting me here, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I want to tell you how proud we are. You just told us. They say that, and I've learned this in my own training for mental health, that self-compassion, some people call it self-love. I think you referenced Ross Rose, and I've read that in
Yeah.
your book. Uh, uh, the whole thing about, can you, if you don't wake up in the morning and love yourself first, isn't it true? You did it. And I want to correct something you said. You got your brother and sister to the funeral. You always had that ability in you. You're a superstar.
Yeah.
That's you. It was covered up by things that were put in there. You're mentoring, because my mother and I are somewhat distant. Since my dad died, I have some things I have to work out still. And I know that one day she's going to face that moment to go to the kingdom above, and I'll be there. But as I sit now, if the phone rang and I had to go, I would struggle, because there's some things I'm still working through. So I loved your book and that part of it. We didn't talk a lot about Natty. There's so many great points about your amazing daughter. I was kind of following her because my daughter was similar age, and the part that I relived them through was when you chose to release Daniel's ashes. I'm just going to speed through it so you can comment on it. That it was August 9th, 5 years after Daniel's birthday. You chose not to release the ashes till then. And tell us, Nettie did something magical that moment. Tell us about.
I'm trying to remember what she did. She, when she was releasing the ashes, I remember. She said, well, she was saying goodbye. She was grabbing his ashes. And then we got to the bottom of the urn, and she said, "Mom, can we keep some of Dad with us?" Okay. And so she kept on referring to his ashes as him, and not in a weird way or scary way or creepy way. Just here he was, and she goes, "I think I'd like to keep some of him with me." And so I was with a friend who actually was a Zen Buddhist monk, and he found this beautiful alabaster shell, and he put in 3 beautiful rocks, and some of the ashes were still in there, and we still have them to this day. And she took those ashes with her and kept her father with her. Was that the part you were talking about?
Oh, what a beautiful story. I'm looking over my left here. I have a little urn. Yeah, my heart's grown, like in the Grinch Who Stole Christmas, that scene where the heart grew 3 times. I'm looking on the left here, and I see this little urn. We still have my little miniature sheets of my dog's bed, and we have her urn in there with the ashes. And but I got to tell you, the reason why that stuck to me, as an author, you're blessing people with this book. It's a very bizarre part of this. It's a very bizarre thing to tell you, but my brothers and I were so dysfunctional when my dad's funeral hit that my younger brother took ashes. We said, "Hold on to ashes, ashes," no pun intended. My dad's name is Ash. And he took them and threw them off a bridge somewhere. To this day, I still don't know where to go to pay last respects to my dad. And I just, when I read your story, releasing him with Natty, the first thing I thought is, this is what it feels. When I read that part of your book, this is what it told me. This is what it feels like to honor. Yeah, this is what it feels like when I read that part in the book, to honor somebody's ashes. And so you've given me that. I'll never have that moment in my life, but you gave me that. So I want to say thank you because that's going to be something that forever and ever always remember in your book. Well, Uh, this interview's gone on longer than I would normally do, but I want to say something as we go to wrap up here. No, don't apologize. I want to tell you as we wrap up that I did that for a reason, because I believe that this book, and I'll be writing a review, everybody, on Amazon and Goodreads when it's released very soon, and we'll get Layla to tell us about that. This book is one of the top 10 so far that I've read that's touched me in a way that I believe it's a book that everybody needs to read. What is in it, Layla, what you've done, and the hero's journey for me with you started when you lost three people in your life. And it was through those moments that you had to go find the truth of your life and come back and teach. And so I honor you with that. As we go to wrap up here, I want to honor you with some leadership words. I write these down as I'm interviewing. They're not scripted. The first one is love. You are love. Number two is compassion. You are compassion. Three is resilience. Man, to be the chief people officer of a company where people depend on you for that emotional side and that strength of people. Wow. And the last one is leadership. You're absolutely what a leader looks like today to lead the world forward. And so, why don't I give it to you to tell us about where to get a hold of the book?
You can go on my website, lailatarraf.com, and you can find all the places that you can buy it. I even wrote a book discussion guide if you wanted to have it be a book club book. And the questions really go from how you deal with adversity, building resilience, some questions about leadership. I mean, the reason why I wrote the book was when I started to talk to some of my friends about some of my insights and experiences and memories. More often than not, they'd say, "Oh, yeah, I do that too. Oh, yeah, I know what you mean." And I thought, while my story, the details of it were personal to me, I think, as you say, we all have the opportunity to go on the hero's journey. So, in some way, it's the universal story for all of us. And if it can help one other person find something in it that can help light the way for them, because I remember thinking, where do I go from here? And it was a number of books that helped light the way for me. And if my book could do that, there's nothing like that, right? I'd be honored.
Absolutely. Well, you are already honored. When you become an author, you become an authority, and you're an authority on this topic. And man, talk about holding a space for people like me and others to be comfortable sharing their painful stories and also their success. And you've done that in this interview and by writing this book. I have two surprises for you quickly. I think one of them you might know about. I'm inducting you into the Quiet Warrior tribe. You're receiving the Quiet Warrior Challenge Coin Award. Now, if you look
Yay.
behind me, there's a picture of the coin. It looks like a guy like I know. The front of it is the show art. The back of it is the narrative of the hero's journey. This is hand painted and handcrafted in the United States. They're beautiful coins. They originated in World War I, where soldiers carried them to commit to each other. And Layla, by receiving it, you become one of just a handful of people in 12 countries now who carry these as quiet warriors, and you commit to continuing on your purposeful work for making an impact in the world. And I'm really excited. So welcome to the Quiet Warrior Tribe.
Thank you. That is so nice. Thank you. Nice.
Okay, so this part I'm just going to ramble as we wrap up here. That we have just launched the QW Literary Award, which is a big deal, and each quarter we'll be inducting a book into the Literary Awards program, and so I'll be sending you an email and asking you to apply for that award. We're building a book list around the world of the top 100 literary books that are going to be highly recommended. And this is a award program that's being branded as one that rival. No, this is a big vision, but the Nobel Prize, things like that. And I'm announcing today that after reading your book and interviewing you, you will be invited to apply for the QW Literary Award, which will get your work out there around the world in an even greater way. That's my gift to you.
That's amazing. Thank you. That's really amazing. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for listening to The Quiet Warrior Show. Create is a motive-based leadership development firm. www.kreat.ca